Welcome to my 237th video on my work with OO gauge. This video will be about Hornby Dublo 3-rail articulated coaches, first featuring a pair of these coaches that I finally managed to buy on eBay, and then covering my efforts to expand the articulated rake from 2 coaches to 3. There will be some running video of the articulated coaches on my Dublo 3-rail tabletop. So I finally managed to buy this pair of Hornby Dublo articulated coaches on eBay UK. I've been trying to pick up an example of these for quite some time, but whenever they came up on eBay UK, the vendors declined to ship them to Canada, where I live. I finally found this pair listed with eBay global shipping included. Expensive, but at least I can get hold of things that way. Since I basically model pre-war LMS operations, I wanted to get articulated coaches in crimson. The Dublo articulated coaches were first made before the war as a pair in LNER teak to go along with the Sir Nigel Gresley locomotive model. The LNER teaks were pretty much the only Dublo coaches available before the war. But after Dublo production resumed post-war in 1947, articulated coach sets became available in crimson, as seen here. I had never handled an example of these models, so I didn't quite know what to expect when I unpacked them. As you may see here, this set basically consisted of 2 regular production Dublo non-corridor crimson coaches, the early type with painted-on windows rather than the later ones with windows actually cut through. These coaches have their regular bogies with metal simplex couplings fitted at front and back, but in the middle the regular bogies are missing, and instead there is a single bogie that bridges the 2 coaches with one end connected to each. None of this came actually fastened together. When you pick the coaches up, the articulating bogie just falls away. Here's a closer view of that bogie. As you may see, pins on either end of the bogie simply fit into holes drilled in the floor of the coaches, considerably closer to the ends than the fittings for the regular bogies, which are still present. So it appears that these coaches were not manufactured specifically to be articulated. Rather, regular production non-corridor coaches were simply modified by omitting the bogie at one end and drilling an extra hole in the floor. And one other modification which I didn't notice until later. Here's a close-up of the end of one of the coaches, showing the regular fitting for the normal bogie and the extra hole that has been drilled to take the pin from the articulating bogie. And here's a close-up of the articulating bogie itself. Basically just a regular Dublo coach bogie, with 3-rail metal wheels, still with the regular bogie fitting hole in the centre, but now fitted with pins at either end to make the articulating connection. Here's the articulating bogie together with one of the regular bogies. You can see that they're basically the same, other than the articulating bogie having no fitting rivet in the centre and having 2 pins for connection to the 2 coaches. One of those connecting pins appears to have been fitted to the hole where the coupling would normally go. The other pin is fitted into a new hole specially drilled in the bogie frame at the other end. Sorry, this is out of focus. This is the piece in the centre of the floor of one of the coaches with the regular Hornby Meccano markings. Now, when we think of articulated coaches in the Big Four era, we tend to think first of the LNER, quite rightly, as the LNER made more use of articulated sets than any other company. However, the LMS, the railway company that I model, largely because my family worked for the LMS, did run some articulated coaches. This is a picture of an actual LMS 3-coach articulated set. Several sets were built after initial experiments in 1935. Note that this set is made up of non-corridor coaches, much like the Dublo articulated coaches that I acquired. The LMS did also build articulated sets with corridor and vestibule coaches. The principal theoretical justification for using articulated sets was weight saving, because there were less bogies. I went ahead with marking my articulated coaches as LMS stock, using some HMRS press-fix decals for LMS yellow, loco and coach markings. The standard company marking seems to have been simply the letters LMS on one of the wide panels of each coach. Here is a press-fix decal in place with its backing tissue, which then needs to be wetted and removed. And here's that coach marking after removal of the backing tissue. I marked both coaches of the articulated set in this way. And I put the same markings on both sides of both coaches. Here are the coaches joined up again, now with my LMS markings. I got the articulated set onto my 3-rail tabletop for some running behind a 264 tank engine fitted with a Wren body finished in LMS crimson. Okay, let me just try and show you this articulated coach set running on the 3-rail tabletop, famous last words. It goes, we're starting with a bit of a jerk for some reason. If I could have got a set of 3 coaches I would have, but I couldn't. I had enough trouble getting these. I had great trouble finding anyone who would sell me a set of these and export them to Canada. This is the problem. Yeah, there were several listed, but they wouldn't come. They would not cooperate with me, the vendors, in terms of putting them on global shipping or whatever. And I finally managed to get these 2. Beggars can't be choosers so much. There we go. They're not terribly close couple, but I guess, you know, when you see them going around the corners, you realise they couldn't be much more closely coupled without the danger of hitting each other as they go around. After all, Dublo 3-rail, standard Dublo 3-rail curves are actually first radius by modern standards, so, you know, it's tight, the curvature, so you can't couple things too closely unless you've got some flexibility. But anyway, there you are. A pair of articulated, pretend at least LMS coaches. There we go. Now, as I mentioned during that running, I would have liked to have had a set of 3 articulated coaches. I'm not sure that Hornby ever actually sold them other than as a pair, but I have seen sets of 3 listed on eBay, but the vendors wouldn't ship them to me in Canada. At this point I turned my thoughts to expanding this set to 3 coaches myself. Given the way the set was made up of standard non-corridor coaches with fairly simple modifications, I thought that I should be able to manage to add a 3rd coach to the set. I checked all of the crimson non-corridor tin plate coaches that I had on hand and selected one that was in fairly good condition and that had a roof about the same colour as the coaches of the articulated set. I also only considered matching coaches, tin plate with painted windows and metal wheels and couplings. Here you can see the coach that I selected simply coupled up behind the articulated pair. At this point, this back coach is not articulated, it's simply normally coupled up via the simplex coupling to the back bogie of the articulated set. I thought that this coach should fit in okay to make up a 3-coach articulated set. I intended this additional coach to go in the middle of the expanded set, with the brake naturally still at the back. One issue was that the roof of the additional coach was noticeably more shiny than the roofs of the articulated set. The paintwork on the roofs of the articulated coaches was suspiciously perfect, leading me to think that it had probably been redone at some point, and it was done with a matte finish, whereas the original Dublo finish of the roofs was high gloss. The roofs of these tin plate coaches can be removed by gently squeezing in the tops of the coach sides and then lifting the edge of the roof up. As you may see here, the edge of the roof fits over a lip in the top of the side for most of its length, with a flange in the centre of the roof preventing the side from being pressed in too much. Once one side has been detached, the roof can be lifted away from the body. I took this roof down to my dirty workshop in the basement to give it a coat of matte finish so that it would hopefully fit in better with the two original coaches in the articulated set. Here you can see the top of the rivet holding on one of the bogies to this coach. Because I wanted to join it in the centre of a 3-coach articulated set, I needed to remove both of the regular bogies from this coach. I used a suitably sized bit in an electric drill to drill away the top of the rivet on the inside of the coach. After a bit of drilling, I pried up the thin remainder of the edges of the rivet inside. This allowed me to pull the bogie off the coach. You can still see the remains of the rivet in the centre of the bogie here. I removed both bogies from my additional coach in this way. Behind them is the connecting bogie from the original articulated set. I removed the remnants of the rivets from the removed bogies. Next, I wanted to convert one of these removed bogies to make a new connecting bogie for my 3-coach articulated set. I examined the original connecting bogie carefully. It was fitted with fairly substantial pins to fit into the holes in the floor of the coaches. These pins appeared to be made of steel, and they had washers around their bases. The 2 pins had washers of different thicknesses. This was done to make the 2 coach ends ride at the same height, since the bases of the pins sat at different levels on the bogie frame. As you can see here, the one on the right is lower, and so it has a thicker washer. I used a smaller bit in an electric drill to drill out the rivet holding the simplex coupling onto one of the removed bogies, since I didn't want a coupling on my new connecting bogie, and I would want to fit a pin into that hole. With the top of the rivet drilled out, I was able to pop the simplex coupling off, and I saved it in my box of spares. I drilled the hole out a bit and put a bolt through it with a nut on top. The nut wasn't really necessary to hold the bolt as it was threaded through the frame, but the nut would serve to raise the end of the coach sitting on that lower end of the bogie. I drilled a hole through the white metal at the other end of the bogie. I had trouble putting a bolt through that hole as the axle was in the way. I had to loosen the axle hangers so that I could move the axle a little, and thus I managed to get a bolt screwed into that hole. So here is my new connecting bogie. The bolts are a bit thinner than the pins on the original, but I think they should work okay. I actually meant to put a washer onto the bolt that doesn't have a nut, but I forgot to do that. I tried the 2 original articulated coaches with my new connecting bogie. It seemed to fit basically okay, although the left-hand coach is a hair lower because I forgot that washer. I tried this combination on my 3-rail tracks just to confirm that my new connecting bogie could work. This combination ran round okay without any obvious problems, so it appeared that my new connecting bogie was functional. The coaches got round the corners okay without the bodies touching. Any difference in height between the 2 coaches was hardly noticeable. The silver tabs on the bogie did show up rather obviously. Next, I needed to complete the modifications to my additional coach. I was going to need to make holes for the pins from the connecting bogies at either end, since this coach was going in the middle. I examined the connecting holes in the original articulated coaches as seen here. I used calipers to measure the distance of the holes from the end of the coach floor. At this point I noticed an additional modification that had been made to the articulated coaches. On the ends where they joined, the buffer beams had been removed. I was going to have to do something similar to this, or the connecting bogies wouldn't sit and pivot properly. The buffer beams on these coaches are simply sections of the end of the floor folded down. I folded the buffer beams on my additional coaches up using pliers. I pulled off the buffers themselves, which were simply riveted through the plate of the beam. I did this at both ends of my additional coach, since it was to go in the middle, removing all 4 buffers and saving them as spares. I couldn't really see how to easily remove the beam section, so I just left them, but bent up out of the way. I figured that the bent-up beams like that shouldn't cause any problems with the running of the connecting bogie. It was important to get the hole for the connecting pin in the right place. I drew a pencil line from the original bogie fitting hole to the end of the coach to give me a centre line. Then I measured off the distance from the end of the floor and made a cross mark where my new hole needed to go. I figured it would be hard to start a drill bit exactly in place on the smooth tin plate floor, so I stood the coach on a piece of wood — there was still no roof fitted to it at this point — and used a centre punch to mark where the holes needed to start. Then I used a suitably sized bit to drill holes where I'd made the punch marks. I tried connecting the 2 connecting bogies, the original and my cobbled together one, attached to the ends of the additional coach with their pins in the holes. It looked as though things might work okay. I fetched the roof of the additional coach back from painting. I didn't actually apply any colour to it, I just put on a coat of matte acrylic to tone down the gloss. I thought that the match seemed fairly okay now. I fitted the roof back to the coach, which is done simply by engaging the edges of the roof with the grooves in the tops of the sides, and pressing it firmly down. I used some black paint on the tabs of the new connecting bogie and also on the bent-up buffer beams just to make things look better during running. I got the newly minted 3-coach set onto the tracks for some testing. I was a little irritated to find that the gap made by the original bogie connection was not the same size as the gap made by my new connecting bogie. I thought that I'd measured things to make them the same, but clearly I missed something, and the gap with the original bogie seen here was noticeably wider than the gap with my new bogie. Here's the narrower gap made by my new bogie. Not at all easy to do anything about this difference at this point. The 3-coach articulated set got round fine without any problems on curves or anything. Last point, I just needed to add LMS letters to the additional coach. I put these on with press-fix transfers as before. This coach looks a bit odd on its own, having no bogies permanently attached. I got the whole set back onto the tabletop for some running, now with all 3 coaches LMS marked. It's thundering out, if you can hear rumbling in the background. Okay, let me just see if I can show these articulated coaches running. Now I've got them expanded to a 3-coach set. I'm still using the 264 tank, which has been fitted with an alternate Wren crimson body. That's the front one of the original articulated set. That's my converted centre carriage, and then this is the back one. I'm a bit disappointed that their gap appears to be bigger than my gap. I measured the hole placement to try and get it exactly the same, but for some reason it ended up different. Maybe the pins on their bogie are separate, are a different distance apart. Huh. And I'm turning up the power now and I'm getting nothing, which is probably because the engine is, yes, on a point and not picking up good contact. Yeah, just need a little push for the engine there because it was sitting on the point. There you go. So there's a 3-coach articulated tray, and I'd be happier if all 3, if the gaps were the same size, but I think it's too late to fix that now. But still, I've got myself a 3-coach articulated train, which I'm relatively pleased about. Tried to buy a 3-coach articulated train, but they wouldn't sell me the 3-coach one, so, and that was probably an improvised one as well, because I think Hornby really only made them as 2s originally, but there we go. The 3-coach articulated train.